This is the Batflip Podcast. Now, here's your host, Damien, David, and Matt.
Hey everybody, and welcome into another episode of season previews here on the Batflip Podcast. I'm Matt here today. I'm with Damien. So we're going to talk about the next team in our list here, and that is the Los Angeles Angels of Anaheim of Southern California, the California Angels, whatever they want to call themselves, owned by Artie Moreno, and that's going to be an interesting topic here in this episode. So yeah, Damien, hope all is well today, and let's get to talk about the Angels here.
Yeah, we need to just clarify. It's the Anaheim Angels. All right, this LA bull crap needs to stop.
They
Um, yeah, it needs to be Anaheim Angels, not Los Angeles Angels of Anaheim or any other uh, way they want to decide to word that.
they were the Anaheim Angels when they won their last World Series,
They
so maybe they should change it back.
they really just should be the Anaheim Angels. Like you don't need to
Got the
say that
Anaheim
you're the.
Ducks. I mean,
Yeah, I mean you could, if you literally are looking at the picture right here, you see the Duck Stadium right there, right above center
right.
field.
Yep.
Like, you just call yourself the Anaheim Angels. It sounds a lot better, anyways, than the Los Angeles Angels of Anaheim. Just Anaheim Angels sounds perfectly fine. So,
Yep.
um,
No doubt, no doubt. But
mini rant out of the way. There.
yeah, I hear you. I hear you. So, just before we get to what's going on with the 2025 roster, just let's talk about just a quick overview of just kind of where this franchise is at right now. They're obviously in the post Shohei Ohtani times where they had these teams that had the two best players in baseball on them. They couldn't break through and make the playoffs. Lots of questions about their ownership. Is Artie Moreno going to want to sell? Is the team like to a new buyer, or is he going to want to keep it? Is he going to buy and add more players, or is he going to sell and try to rebuild their farm that's desperately needed? This is a team that's kind of in flux. It's a little bit different from these last three we've talked about because they do have some talent on their roster, and it's an interesting group that we'll talk about today. But Damien, what are your thoughts on just kind of the overall like outlook for just where the Angels are at as a franchise right now?
Yeah, I mean, they're. I don't want to say they're in peril, but it's just because Artie Moreno is there, and like he is such a bipolar owner that like his mood swings and changes depending on the way he wakes up, and he basically tries to shift his entire team to feel around that day. Like, there was a couple years ago he was looking to sell, and then all of a sudden now he's all bought in and he wants to spend money again, but then he didn't want to spend money, and then now this offseason he's trying to push to spend more money again. It just, they're in a weird spot because it's like you said, they're in the post Shohei Ohtani era. You're hanging on to the thread of the last part of the Mike Trout era here as well. So it's a really weird spot for Angels and Angels fans to kind of be in.
Yeah, and we'll move on here and talk about what they did this offseason. And it kind of adds to what we were just saying, where this team is just like been so active this offseason. And it's not really like big moves. They've made a couple big moves, but it's like just a lot of moves in general. So, last year this team won about, I think they won 65 games or something. I don't have it in front of me right now, like, what the exact number was, but they were finished last place in the division. They finished behind Oakland. Well, what was the Oakland A's last year, and we'll get to talking about them here soon. But they lost some big pieces from that team. Kevin Pillar, Brandon Drury. They lost a couple relievers in Hunter Strickland and Matt Moore. They lost Patrick Sandoval, and I feel like that's one that kind of hurts because not necessarily because he was really good last year and you're losing a lot of production from last year's team, but because he had a couple of really good seasons and he showed a lot of promise here just a couple years ago, and then he got injured. He's had battled some injuries. I believe he's injured now.
Yeah, he
Um,
had Tommy John.
yeah, Tommy John surgery, so he's going to be out anyways. And then went ahead and non-tendered him, and then they traded a few guys. Davis Daniel was a guy who has some promise as a reliever. Matt Face they traded as kind of, I guess he's kind of a backup catcher. Griffin Canning they traded in a weird trade to the Braves, and he got then non-tendered and is now with the Mets. And Roansy Contreras is another guy who, when he was the Pirates, showed some promise. Came over to the Angels, didn't really do a lot, and they went ahead and waived him. So, this team, it's a lot of names. It's a lot of guys who played a lot for them last year. But Damien, do you think any of these like really hurt their roster that much? Maybe Patrick Sandoval or Brandon Drury.
Yeah, I mean Sandoval when healthy is he's a really solid pitcher. And there was even some thought that he could have some more upside, but just with the injury, it doesn't really hurt because he's not going to do anything. He's not going to pitch this year at all, anyways. Brandon Drury had a couple good years, but was really, really bad this last season. So I don't know if that really, did anything for him either way. And I think the only real kind of one that I was a little bit more not worried, but like weirded out by was them letting go of Griffin Canning for like somebody it was I thought a little too early, but it obviously clearly wasn't going to work out there. Like they weren't able to develop him the right way. So if you're really looking at these subtractions, I don't really think much of it hurts where this team is or was going.
Yeah, and looking at their additions, they've added a pretty good bit. They added Jorge Soler, who is it's a weird ad. It was in a trade. They took on the entire contract, which was pretty widely thought of as a bad decision, depending on how much money you're willing to spend and put on your payroll. If you got an unlimited payroll, it's fine. But the Soler contract has been thought to be underwater by a lot of people, and they took on that contract. Well, Soler is a pretty good hitter still. I mean, he can put up a 120 WRC plus in a season. Hit you a lot of home runs. Add some power to this lineup. Add some depth to this lineup, which is something that's pretty badly needed. So that is an upgrade for them. He just adds a bat to their organization. They brought in Ryan Noda off of waivers, who showed some promise at times with Oakland and well now Sacramento slash no name. But when he was he was in Oakland, and he showed some promise. Definitely a big walks guy, which is definitely interesting. Scott Kingery is a former top prospect they traded for. It sounds like he's going to be on the big league roster. Garrett McDaniels, Rule 5 pick. Damien, I believe he was a Dodgers guy. So you might know more about him than I do. I don't know much about him. It seems like he's just kind of going to be the last guy in the bullpen type if he even sticks with the organization. Um, but then we get to the big ones they added, and that's Yusei Kikuchi, who I thought was a really good ad for them. For this year's team. I mean, he's got a lot of upside. He's shown some promise the last couple of years. The metrics on him are really, really, really good. And it's kind of an opposite of what the Angels have added in the past when they add a pitcher that has an inflated ERA compared to the metrics where they've like a Tyler Anderson, who we'll talk about in a little bit, who's always run a really low ERA compared to his batted ball data and his metrics. So Kikuchi is definitely an interesting ad. We'll talk about him a little bit more here in a minute. Kevin Newman's a journeyman shortstop that's going to be on the big league team. Travis d'Arnaud is the other really interesting ad for me, and a guy that they've got Logan O'Hoppe, and but Logan O'Hoppe's dealt with a lot of injuries, and Travis d'Arnaud can still play. It was very interesting when the Braves just went ahead and let him walk and didn't pick up his option. Because he had a pretty good season this past year, but there were some things if you dove into his season that worried you about him aging and maybe not being the same guy going forward. Kyle Hendricks is kind of a 5-starter at this point. It's kind of weird to get rid of Griffin Canning and then bring in Kyle Hendricks. To me, I didn't really understand that too much. At least Griffin Canning has some form of like upside as like he's young. Kyle Hendricks just kind of cooked. And Connor Brogdon's a guy who was a really interesting reliever in the last few years for Philly that, coming off a really bad year and some injuries. So their additions are interesting that I think they definitely improved their roster, just on the surface here. Um, but Damien, what do you think? Which one of these ads do you think is the kind of going to help them out this year more than the others?
Yeah, I don't know if it's about helping them out more. I mean, obviously, if you're talking about who's going to help them, it's going to be Soler and Kikuchi,
Yeah.
right? They're the two biggest name guys. I think Darno is going to be a real underrated ad, and that's just because of the veteran leadership behind Ohapi. Like, I think he's going to show him everything he needs to do there. But I'm really interested in Noda and Scott Kingery, seeing if they both get another chance. Kingery this last year in the Phillies AAA system had 25 homers, 25 stolen bases. I know the WRC plus only says it's a 104, but and his K issues are still there, but still he's a guy who has a little bit of power and some speed there. I think he's had a good season before, put up a 2 WAR season in 2019, so I'd be interested for that. And Noda, he's a big time power guy. He swings and misses a lot, but in 2023, in 128 games there with Oakland, he put up 2.1 WAR, hit 16
Yep.
homers, a 122 WRC plus, and then he didn't touch the major leagues very much this last year. 36 games, and was objectively really bad, 44 WRC plus. But he also walks a ton, so I think those are two guys who I think are really interesting that could, serve a kind of an underrated purpose on this Angels team.
Yeah, for sure. So moving on to the position players, and you mentioned serving that underrated purpose. The thing that really needed to be added to this team over the past several years is just depth, and I think that adding guys who have some talent to the depth pool is going to be really helpful for them. But looking at their lineup, this is definitely a huge step up from the last few teams we've talked about. You have two or three guys here who very well could be all stars this year.
Yeah.
You know, Not that they all will be, but they've got talent. Obviously, everything with the Angels for the last, I guess, 13 years has
Yeah.
been behind Mike Trout. I mean, and Mike Trout is such an interesting topic right now because of the injuries he's dealt with, and the when he plays, he's been really good for the most part. Now he has showed some signs of decline over the last couple of years at the plate. The swing and miss is elevated a little bit. We don't know if that's partially due to the injuries or if it's just he's getting up into his mid 30s. But Mike Trout can still play, and you can see that in his projected WAR being 3.9. But other than him, I think you've got an interesting mix of guys who Anthony Rendon being the big one here that he's obviously still got it in him. Like it's not like he's not that old, and he was such a good player for the Nationals, and it's just not been good at all for the Angels. I mean, he hasn't been able to stay on the field when he's played. He's been bad, and for this team to be successful, I think it's going to be interesting with him if he can like kind of regain at least some form of his 2020 and before self, because this is somebody who I think if he just kind of rebounds a little bit, just gets his confidence back a little bit, maybe could put up like a 3 WAR season this year. And you add that to some of these young guys that I'll let you talk about, that Zach Neto, Nolan Shanuel, and Logan O'Hoppe, who are all very interesting young guys who are like rapidly pushed to the big leagues, and they almost feel a little bit like prospects in a way because they were so rapidly pushed to the big leagues that they don't have a ton of professional experience. So, those three guys, do you think that those three guys could take a step forward and add some depth to the Trout? And Taylor Ward's also a good player. Renjifo's not bad. They have two or three good players in this lineup. Can Neto, Shanuel, and O'Hoppe add to that and really like add a 5-6 man lineup here that can really be helped out and that can really help out and win more games than expected for this team?
Yeah, I mean, I absolutely think so. I mean, you're talking about Neto this last year, played 155 games, was a 114 WRC plus guy, 23 homers, 30 stolen bases. That was his, real first big league season. I mean, he had played 84 games there, but first full time season at least, put up 3.5 WAR. Like he's only going to keep getting better. Nolan Shanuel, I think he started to figure some stuff out later in the season. He had that awful, awful start, if I'm remembering right, and then he uh he decided to, or not decided. Sorry, I got something else threw me off track. I think he could be a valuable piece. And then Logan O'Hoppe. I mean, we mentioned it before. He was also coming off of shoulder surgery
Mhm.
for this last year. He
Yep.
he had those 51 games in 2023 where he had a 112 WRC plus. This year, kind of struggled offensively, only a 101 WRC plus. Definitely upticked his defense to a good defensive metric here, but I think his offense has a level to take, a step to take forward here. His swing and miss was up a little bit. This last year, 24% K rate in 2023 to almost 30% in 2024. So that's typical of a guy coming off shoulder surgery. We've seen it before, swinging and missing a little bit more because he doesn't have the trust in it. So I think there's very real avenues for each of those guys to take some sort of a step forward.
Yep. I agree. And just looking at this lineup, there's only two players in their projected starting nine at the plate that had a sub 100 WRC plus last year, and it kind of shows how this team was. really snake bit by injuries in a lot of ways, and just struggled to stay healthy and keep guys on the field. So, and one of those guys that didn't is Anthony Rendon, who obviously used to be like a superstar. So, definitely interesting. And you mentioned Ohapi and his injury issues. That's where Darnold comes in. He's going to be able to spell Ohapi a lot and really help out with just keeping him fresh. And if Ohapi gets hurt, you feel pretty good about Darnold taking over for a certain amount of time. So definitely interesting there. And then they've got a few prospects. I think the big one to know here is Christian Moore, because he was their first round draft pick last year. And when you hear Angels and first round draft pick, it means they're about to be in the big leagues. So, and I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, but didn't he make his debut last year? I don't. He must not
Christian
have.
Moore did not.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So I wouldn't be surprised to see him up. And they also have Nelson Rada. I think that's how you say his name is Rada or Rada.
Rada, I
Um,
think.
yeah, he's also an interesting prospect. He's their only top 100 prospect on their organization, which is something
Yeah.
that um, you know this team just has not rebuilt their farm system. Part of it's because they've rushed these guys, like we talked about, but the farm system is pretty weak. There's just not a lot of reinforcements here.
Yeah, I mean, that's something that's kind of typical of what this Angels team has done. They've also sacrificed some of their future before to trade for people to kind of push sometimes for these deadlines. Um, so that's not really a great option. But yeah, I would assume Christian Moore comes up at some point this year. There's also the worry that Rengifo might miss the start of the season. He had that wrist surgery at the end of last year. I don't know what his status is moving forward coming into spring training. I knew it was going to be a tight timeline. I haven't heard any updates or setbacks there, but usually we'll get that information when spring training starts, and we are recording this as of January
Yeah.
14th. So there's obviously things that could change here.
Yeah, and you mentioned the things that could change, especially in this position player lineup here. That the Angels have been rumored to be in on some guys who are still, some of the higher end free agents that are remaining. Main primary one being Anthony Santander and Jerkson Profar. That would be a big deal for this lineup. You just think about adding those guys in, and you replace Adele out in right field, and that's a pretty big upgrade because those guys are both going to be projected 2 to 3 WAR. And then you really have a roster where you feel pretty good about every position except maybe Rendon, but he's still got upside just because of his track record and his history. So
Yeah.
I think the big thing here is just maybe add a piece there if they want to compete this year, which is questionable, but and then hope they stay healthy. I mean, if you get a healthy Mike Trout, like that's just that they haven't had that in years, and it's just something to look forward to. But moving on, I think the pitching is kind of where we start to get worried about this team. The lineup should be okay if they stay healthy, but the pitching has some good pieces at the top, but it's just not very deep. You look at Yusei Kikuchi. We talked about him a little bit. His metrics were insane last year. Performed extremely well with Toronto, and then moving over to Houston, and they brought him in, signed him to a pretty big contract. And he's going to be their ace. And I mean, he's really kind of peaking right now. So if he's healthy and performs like he did last year, he's probably the best pitcher the Angels have had, other than Otani, who was kind of an enigma in a long time. You add in Jose Soriano, who had a pretty good rookie season last year. I believe he was a rookie. It might have been his second season, but you add him in. He's showed some promise last year for sure. You throw in Tyler Anderson, who's a veteran. Kyle Hendricks is a veteran. Those are two guys you don't feel great about. Obviously, Hendricks is gonna be there because sorry, Anderson is gonna be there because of the contract size. I think Hendricks will still be there, but you're kind of thinking of him as a 5 starter. I think the most interesting guy we're going to talk about in this episode, though, is Reed Detmers.
Yeah.
Reed Detmers is his stuff is really, really good. He's a former top prospect. He's thrown a no hitter, and he's had like stretches where he was exceptionally good in the big leagues, and then he's had stretches where he just couldn't keep it together. And you look at his season last year; he was in the minors a lot last year. There's been a lot of rumors that the Angels might move on from him, and you look at like last year, his ERA was a 6.70 in 87 innings, which is horrible. But his xFIP, which is normalizes home run rate, and it's basically a measure of FIP that normalizes the home run rate, was 3.86. I mean, gets lots of swing and miss. he walks guys, but it's not like excessive. So you kind of think that like maybe Detmers, if he takes a step forward, you might have three guys here you can kind of rely on. Maybe a couple of these prospects like Caden Dana, Aldegary, maybe a couple of those guys come up and one of them succeeds, and you might have some form of a good rotation here. But I feel like the upside at the top end is a little bit limited, and there's just not enough depth here. Like you got to have more arms than this to go through a season.
Yeah, I'm not a big fan of Kikuchi, unless like his Houston time was short, but they showed some difference in the pitch mixes and stuff, and he was good there. I'm just worried about if he can sustain that moving forward.
Yeah,
And he hasn't had that proven track record over a full season before. So I'm a little bit worried about that. I do like Jose Soriano a good bit. I think he has a decent chance to make a step forward this next year. Um, Detmer's obviously, I mean, you're talking about a super young guy who there's all the talent in the world there, and we've seen pitchers be able to starting pitchers who have good stuff
yeah.
be able to live with walking guys a little bit.
Mhm.
You know, he has the capability to strike out the people. I mean, his strikeout per nine the last year was 11.2 per nine over his 87 innings this year. Like even with his walk rate, I think that's sustainable. Like I I really believe Detmers could do something,
Yeah.
and their depth there with Dana Aldegary, George Klassen, which I'm sure is going to come up this year, and even one we didn't mention, Jack Kuchanowicz. He had a really mixed bag coming up this year, but 3.99 ERA, a 4.62 FIP. Um, didn't really strike out many people. He's more of a contact oriented guy, even though he throws like 97, which is interesting. But still, I think there's a little bit something in there if he's able to figure out more of the strikeout stuff. So
Yep.
I think the starting pitching it can be fine, but there's just a ton of question marks around it, and you don't feel confident in it.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. One little last note on the starting pitching, and we'll talk about this same note with the relief pitching. But the starting pitching has three guys in this projected rotation who are over 34, or either 34 or older.
Yeah.
So Kikuchi turns 34 this year. Tyler Anderson and Kyle Hendricks are 35. So this is not a young rotation. They do have the prospects there, but this is currently not a young rotation as it's built. But looking at their bullpen, we won't talk too much about their bullpen. This has really been an Achilles heel for this team,
Yeah.
blowing a lot of games late. You've got Ben Joyce at the back end. He's famous for throwing like 105 miles an hour. Definitely has the upside. Brock Burke. He's had some form of success at times with Texas. He's over in Anaheim now. Definitely, got some strikeout stuff. Um, and then you look at a bunch of guys who are not really big names, and it really feels like a lot of depth arms. The one thing that's really interesting about this bullpen group is that there's not a single member that you think about bullpens as being a lot of veteran guys, like former starters who transition, that kind of thing. They don't have a single member of their projected opening day bullpen at this stage that is over 30 years old. It's a lot of
Interesting.
young guys in the bullpen, and I don't know
Yeah.
if I've ever seen that before. But definitely something to look for there, because you start talking about young relievers who throw really hard and everything, and a couple of these guys might pop and have a really good season and figure it out. So definitely interesting to look at. And then the last guy to kind of look at is Robert Stevenson, who is over 30. He had Tommy John surgery last April. I would assume he returns at some point this year.
Yeah.
But pre Tommy John surgery, he was really, really good. So he could end up adding to the back end of this bullpen and be a pretty big piece for them. So definitely an interesting bullpen. You know, do you have any guys here that stand out to you, Damien, that you feel like are gonna in for a big year?
Yeah, I think one that could is Chase Silseth.
Yep.
He throws absolute gas and has a nasty slider. He had a couple years ago, he had a stretch where he was actually a really good starting pitcher. And I wish they would have gave him a little bit more run to figure that out because I think he only has like 15 career starts or something like that. If not less than that. So
Yeah.
I like Silseth. I think if he converts to a full time reliever, I think having the dynamite fastball and slider, he could be a guy to pop. And then whenever Stevenson comes back, I mean, obviously that I there was the talk early last year when Stevenson was signed that they were going to potentially look at using him as a starter at one point. I doubt that's going to happen at least this year,
Yeah,
coming off of
but
Tommy
also Tommy
John.
John. No.
Maybe next year, but yeah, I mean that's pretty
Yeah.
much it.
Yeah, and one note on Silseth, you mentioned I believe he had an elbow issue last year that kept him out most of the year, and he is going to be stretched out in spring training, so he could add to the rotation mix too. But it's very possible he
17
ends up in the bullpen. So
17 career games started, by the way.
yeah, yeah, he's been a swing guy for them for the most part. But yeah, so moving on, last page here is going to be the outlook for this team. And like we mentioned earlier, it's a big step up from the first three teams we've done. The over under win total is 71.5. So Damien, what do you think of the over under? You take the over, take the under. What do you think?
Man, this is tough because looking at this team and all the signs, I think you can say like over, right? Like a team that has the level of offense that they're going to have, considering they have Mike Trout back, considering if you get Anthony Rendon there, like adding Jorge Soler's big. Like I say over, but then it's just like they find a way to fail every single year
Yeah.
for me. But I honestly think I'm going to take the over, and I think the division. It's not going to be like the Angels aren't going to be in the division to win it, right? But I think it's going to be an interesting division this year. Like I don't think any of these teams are going to be overpowered, and really like dynamite and defeat a bunch of these guys. Like, so I think they're going to play a ton of close games. They're going to lose some of that, but I also am trying to err on the side of I want a healthy full Mike Trout season. So give me that and give me 72 wins at least.
Yeah, I don't I don't think I can take the over. I just don't trust the Angels. I don't trust them to
It's
stay
fair.
healthy. I
That's
mean,
fair.
like, Mike Trout hasn't been healthy in years. I hope it happens. I hope he's healthy. I hope he has a great year. I really, really like Mike Trout, but, you start relying on a couple of star players who have injury issues, and it just feels like it could collapse, and one thing to mention too is this division. You talked about it being a little bit open, and I don't know that it means it's really worse than it was last year. I think part of it is like the Astros are probably worse than they were last year. With the pieces they've lost. Now they've added back pieces too. Added Christian Walker. They're still a talented roster,
Mhm.
but, the Mariners, I think, will be similar to what they were last year, but the Rangers are going to be a lot better. I mean, they get all their guys back. They're going to be healthier. And the A's are going to be a lot better. I mean, I don't think the A's are going to be good, but they're going to be better than
Yeah.
they were last year. They've added pieces. They have some good players now on their roster. So the Angels would have to make a 9 game improvement on their record last year to hit the over, and I just don't trust them to do that. So I'm going to take the under. Their odds to make the postseason are plus 700, which really isn't that. Looking at this being our fourth team we're doing, that is really
Yeah.
not that low, of odds. So, their odds to win the AL West are plus 3,500, and their odds to win the World Series are plus 25,000. So, um, interesting team. We'll see what happens with them. And as we mentioned before, this is a team that very well could still add a piece and change their outlook a little bit. I don't feel too bad about doing them early in this series just because even if they add a piece, I still don't think they're going to be a contender for the World Series. And I think that's kind of the goal is to get the contenders late.
Yeah.
But they could add like an Anthony Santander, Jerkson Profar. It fills a big hole for them. Maybe a pitcher. I don't know. I don't know if they've been rumored on any pitchers recently, but they could definitely use a pitcher, and if they add one, they could be in pretty good shape there. But yeah, any
Not that it's not that it's been rumored, but if the market keeps lingering the way it is, I could see them easily being in on maybe a Jack Flaherty,
okay, yeah,
or maybe
very well,
even knowing Artie Moreno, he might just send Perry Managian to the blank check to go get Tanner Scott, just because that
yeah,
seems like a very Artie
it,
Moreno move.
it does,
So I wouldn't be surprised for any of that.
yeah. So thank you everybody for joining us, and don't forget, like, comment, subscribe. We'll catch you on the next episode here. I believe the next one will either be the A's or the Nationals. I believe the A's will be the next one. So we'll catch you on that one. Thanks for tuning in.
Thanks, guys.